Lovely. So, hello everybody. Welcome to the Fluff to Stuff October. I'm ahead of myself again. The October guest of the month, and today we've got the gorgeous Felicia Lowe from Sweet Georgia Yarns, and also the School of Sweet Georgia, which she founded maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Can't remember now, actually. How long ago? It's a question, it's a proper question, yeah. But just in case you don't know who I am, my name is Grace, Grace O'Neill, and I run the Babbles Traveling Yarns podcast, and I am Grace the Babbler on Instagram. And we run the Fluff to Stuff campaign with Mina, who is the knitting expat. So we are joining you today. Normally there's also Mars, who is based in Florida. She is Hey Brownberry and has the Hey Brownberry podcast. She can't make it this month. So welcome to everyone here who's joining us live, and welcome to everyone who watches on YouTube afterwards as well. It's lovely to have you. So we're going to start off really with just a bit about yourself, Felicia. So I just wanted to know why you started spinning. Like, when did you first start spinning? I always ask this first question just to get an idea.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this. And so just to start off, I think you were asking a question about the School of Sweet Georgia and when that started, and that started back in 2017. Prior to that, I started the blog for Sweet Georgia in 2004, and then started Sweet Georgia as a business in 2005. And so I had started spinning around 2004 was when I started. And I started spinning because I was a long time knitter, and I was walking through the P&E one summer. The P&E is the Pacific National Exhibition here in Vancouver, and it's just like the area where you go. It's kind of like a country fair, I guess, but it's like in the city. But they have animals, and they have sheep. They'll have chickens. They'll have just stuff like that. And I was walking through the marketplace one year, and they had a bag of dyed fiber. And I didn't know what it was, but it was so attractive and it looked so appealing. And then I discovered that you have to use a spindle in order to turn this fiber, this colorful fiber, into something. And I was reading the instructions. The instructions had been written on a pamphlet by hand and then photocopied. And it was super archaic. And it was about spinning that fluff into a single yarn using the spindle. And then you had to take it off, and then you had to do it again, and you had to apply them together. And I was like, that's way too much work. I'm never going to do
that. Seems like so many steps, doesn't it?
It's just like, I have to do this 2 times? Nobody's going to do that. But then I couldn't get that idea out of my mind, and it just stuck with me for a couple of months. And then finally I was like, I need to figure out how to do this. And so at the time in Vancouver, there was a store called Birkeland Brothers Wool. It was like a 3-generation family business in Vancouver. They had a massive carter in the back of their store, but in the front they sold fiber, they sold wheels, they sold spindles, all that kind of stuff. And so I went and I bought a spindle and a bag of fiber. And I was going home trying to figure out how it all worked. I was too shy to actually ask the people at the store how to do it. So I just took it home and was just like, I'll figure it out. I can do this. And spent a couple of days with the drop spindle, kept falling on the floor. I was getting frustrated, but I finally managed to make some yarn by the end of the week. And then by the end of the week, I went back to the store and I bought a wheel. And so that's how obsessed I was, like so fixated on this idea, like I'm going to learn how to do this. And that's how I got started.
That's deep commitment early on, isn't it? Like, yeah. You do get frustrated with that spindle after a while. You're like, this is too slow. There's so many jobs to do. I can't just do that. There are amazing people who do the spindle work, which is gorgeous, and they use it as a meditative process. But like, I think it depends on the type of maker you are. Like I'm like impatient. I'm impatient. I need it. I need to know. I need it now.
No, absolutely. I mean, I love spindles. They're beautiful. I love, like just playing. I would take a spindle with me to a doctor's office and just sit there, for the time that you have to sit there. I would do that. But when I'm at home in the evenings and I'm spinning on a Saxony wheel, big drive wheel, just making yarn.
Just like letting it flow, really, isn't it? I find the spindles amazing as well for demonstrations. So like they're just the best because you can really go slow. I think when people are, when you're looking, you know, when you're doing demonstrations, because I did a lot of like field, we call them field shows in Ireland, you know, with the mart, and they're selling off the sheep and they're showing off the sheep and there's ducks and cows and everything. But I used to get called up and there'd be a shearing and then I'd be next to them and I'd be showing them how to do all of that stuff, which was so much fun because it was all like farmers, big farmers, and they're like, all right, oh, right, and I'm like, this is the wrong audience, but anyway. You never know. So I guess the next question then that we have is, what do you enjoy most about your spinning? What do you, so we'll talk about what you enjoy most, and then if you could think about what you find the most frustrating, maybe. So we'll start with what you enjoy.
When I spin, I really enjoy working with color and texture. I think that that's one that is huge for me. I love seeing fibers become really, I like seeing fibers really organized. I do like worsted spinning. I like seeing all those fibers nice and parallel, twisting together, smooth. You can just see the angle of all those fibers together. I love seeing color transitions shift. I know this is not for everyone. I know we talked a lot this year in the school specifically about like learning how to do carded preparations and making rollags and blending, and all of that stuff is really beautiful and fun and cool. But I still really, really enjoy that whole worst. I think it comes down to like wanting to have control over how things are and putting things in order, making things aligned, making things really nice and smooth and perfect. I really enjoy that part of spinning. And then, you know, how the yarns at the end of the day can have that luster and stuff like that. So I do like spinning silk blends, woolen silk blends, those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think I had a couple of those actually. I've been working on. They've been my Fluff to Stuff project, which I've been lacking. I need to get. This always happens to me. I always make a big deal out of a big long year-long project and it takes me 3 years. I'll get there. That's totally fine.
Yeah, totally.
But so do you find any part of the spinning process frustrating? Like what's your one area of, I wish there was a different way to do this.
Yeah, so actually, for the past couple of years, I felt kind of like I was at a bit of a, like a, I don't know how you say it, like a kind of like a, I was just kind of stuck in a lot of ways with my spinning. When I first got that wheel, my first wheel, I spent every day sitting at that wheel for at least an hour or two every day. I'd come home from work, and the first thing I'd do is I would sit down and I would spin. And I feel like I made a lot of progress at the start. And then I was making the same kind of yarns over and over and over again. And then the more I liked that smooth and, you know, worsted quality, then the more I would try to spin all of that kind of yarn faster. And then what I ended up doing was making yarn that was more hard, and it didn't feel good, and it didn't, I didn't like it, and I didn't want to work with it, and I didn't want to knit with it or weave with it or anything after the fact. And so I was really frustrated with my yarn for actually quite a number of years. And it was only this past year when I've been like meeting with other spinners and learning from other spinners about other ways of doing things that I really pushed myself to try different things and practice very intentionally, practice different techniques very intentionally. And I think that really has made a huge difference this past year. This past year, I feel like I've actually come back to really enjoying spinning and enjoying the yarn that I'm making, specifically like the yarn that I'm making, how it feels at the end of the day, and that I actually want to do stuff with it. I feel like that has been really, really helpful this year. So it's something that like I really always try to encourage other people to look at too. It's like it's more than just making yarn. I'm making a 2-ply yarn. I've made yarn. It's kind of like asking yourself, do you like the yarn that you've made? Do you like how it feels? You've knit it up. Does it feel good? Do you want to make more of this? Or what could you do differently to change that for like the next skein or the next skein or the next project or whatever it is?
That's a really good point, because I think everybody gets to that plateau in your skill level, right? It's the same with like a language. You know, you get to a certain stage and you can tip on by, but you don't tip over into fluency because you don't push yourself a little bit harder. You know, you're just sitting there and you're just spinning, or, you know, just saying the same things, and you're making the same kind of like, it's okay, it's all right. I think I'm there, but I'm still quite enjoying myself, so that's fine. But yeah, it's really interesting, and the concept of, you were looking for perfect, but it actually turned into kind of kind of making hard yarns, like making a
Hmm.
yarn that was so perfect that it almost had no character anymore, I guess, or
Yeah.
no, yeah.
And I think beyond perfect, it's kind of like also trying to combine that with the idea of like being really efficient or really productive,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
making a lot of yarn. So you want to spin it faster, you want more.
I
And
want
I
a
think
sweater spins, and I
I
want this,
want
and I want.
lots of yardage. And I think it was like kind of trying to slow down and be more mindful, like what's actually happening. And it actually, there was one instructor that I worked with this year who looked at my spinning and she was like, you need to make sure that you're drafting forward the exact same amount, the same distance every time, and, feeding on the same amount every time and developing that really consistent rhythm. And I was like, of course. If I want to have consistent yarn, of course I should be consistent with how I'm drafting. And oh, it made so much sense, but I just didn't really think about it too much.
I know, I
That's
know.
the problem.
I think, yeah, I think like I definitely don't, because I just kind of get into a Zen mode and I love the feeling of it, but I'm not very conscious of what I'm doing. I feel like you really need to be listening to audiobook and looking at what you're doing. You can't really be watching your TV if you really want like consistent yarn and stuff, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so the next question I had was, so we asked these questions to everybody, and it's really interesting to get like everybody's different answers because every spinner is so different. So the next question we always ask is, what advice do you have for new spinners? And you do quite a lot of teaching, so and you organize quite a lot of teaching. So I'd say you have. I mean, I'm really interested to hear this answer actually. So
Yeah, I think it's funny because I just came out with a video of because we have a YouTube channel as well, and I just came out with a video on Friday, and it happens to be about weaving, but this totally can be applicable to spinning as well. But it was this like idea of how I just sometimes I hold myself back. Sometimes my mental state hold myself back and I think, oh, I could never do that. Oh, I could never do that. And I feel like the advice that I need to hear for myself is just try. There's nothing wrong with trying. What's the worst thing that could happen? Just try. And so I think that happens with spinning as well. I know, like, I have for a long time admired a whole bunch of spinners. Like, for a long time I admired Margaret Stove, who was doing that fine merino spinning. She was from New Zealand. She wrote a
right.
book about it. I went and took a workshop with her. She's so lovely and amazing. And then I also really admired Sarah Lamb, who is in California, and she spins like 100% silk, like like
Oh, I
thousands
think
of yards
I
of
think
like.
I listened to a podcast about her on the Weave podcast. Maybe
Oh, it's possible, yeah.
does she also breed for colored silks sometimes?
Yes, so she
Yes,
take no, I don't know if she no, but she takes her silk that she's spun.
yeah.
So she spins her own silk, and then she dyes the silk, and then she weaves it all. So she's spinning
Ah,
pretty much entirely with all of her hand spun silk, and it's amazing. And so I always kind of like look at other spinners. And I'm like, oh, I could never do that. Oh, I could never do that. And I think that the advice that everybody needs to hear is you just have to try. You just have to try. Like, to
yeah.
not be so scared, not be so worried about what everybody else is doing. Just
Mhm.
try and then see what you enjoy, right? And then you go out down your own rabbit hole.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. It's absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to find some of those links that people that you talked about. So Margaret Stowe, very interesting because I was given her recommendation for when I was spinning for my wedding gown, which
Mhm.
I didn't end up using the yarn actually because the cats got it. But anyway, but and then what was the other woman's name that you mentioned there?
Sarah Lamb, so it's Sara and
Uh-huh.
then Lamb, Lamb.
L-A-M-B, lovely, like the
Yeah.
animal.
So she has a blog. I think it's still ongoing as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So, yeah, I think the fear is a thing that stops an awful lot of newbies,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's such a
Yeah.
shame because there's no real, like, it's not a big loss. If something goes
Yeah.
wrong, you just do it again. The sheep are always making more wool, I suppose
Mhm.
people are terrified to use like their perfect yarn and everything, but
No, I think one thing that we also try to remind people as well, because this is it's the whole thing in the school, is that learning is going to be forever. And I think that very often, like the reason why I tell people that I got stuck with my spinning, the reason why I tell people why like I didn't like my yarn is because I want everybody to know that there's no end point. You don't
no.
get to a point where you're like, my yarn is perfect. There's no perfect. It's just, it's continuous. And so there's always going to be something else to learn. There's always going to be something to work on. And so just encouraging people to look at this thing as a long, long journey
Yeah.
rather than, I'm done. I know how to make yarn.
I was trying to get James to learn how to knit, and he did. He knit a one whole row, and then he was like, I'm done. I know how to knit. I've done it. Finished, finished
Check.
knitting. I'm like, that's not how it goes, sir. But I really like in the way that the School of Sweet Georgia is set up. Full disclosure, sorry, I'm an ambassador for Sweet Georgia, so I do want to say that I get access to the school, which is amazing. So there's a section in there which is like your learning journey, so you can actually put in your goals, and you can, and everyone can kind of have a conversation. You can pop into someone else's profile, and that's really nice because you can like look back and reflect on where you were. Now, I'm not great at keeping up anything, but it is nice if you're if you're good at that.
Mhm.
It is
I know,
great.
like, even for myself, I've put in my little sort of learning progress as well because I'm constantly working on things.
Oh,
And I noticed that, like, the last time I posted, the time that I posted before was like 4 months prior. So I'm not posting every month or anything like
oh
that.
no.
But it's nice to be able to look back at something and then see how things have changed in those 2 months or 4 months or however long it's been between your posts because that's where you see progress. That's where you see that movement. I think it's when you don't see progress is when you get frustrated and you're like, oh, nothing's happening. I'm not changing. I'm not getting any better. Things are just how they are. But
I'm
if you
bad
can
at this.
see,
The whole thing
I'm
I'm
bad at
bad
this.
at. And you're like,
Hmm.
you literally just started. You can-
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Give yourself permission to be bad at something, and then you can get good at something. Great,
Exactly.
great. So, do you have? I'm quite. Oh, actually, this next question is about your stash. I
Okay.
recently pulled out my stash, and I nearly had palpitations. I nearly died. I did have palpitations, and I nearly died. But I found some beautiful, beautiful stash that I was like, I need to use this now, like right now. Do you have any of that, like really precious, precious stash? Do you have like your most favorite stash that you couldn't possibly use yet, or something that you would?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What
Yeah,
would?
I do. I do. I have like some of my fiber that I kind of go back to every 6 months or so that I spin a little bit of, and it's just like too precious to keep spinning everything. So I'm just kind of like enjoying it a little bit at a time. But it's like yak and silk and hand dyed, and I love it. It's beautiful. It just makes beautiful lace weight yarn. But I do have this box of Pagora that one of my spinning students gave me
What's that
like
now? Pagora. Is it is it a blend or is it a?
no, it's a fiber, but I remember spinning this many years ago at one of the fall retreats for spin off, but I don't remember anything about it. All I know is that this box of Pygora was given to me as a gift by one of my students when I stopped teaching at Place des Arts, and it's like for some reason it's so precious to me I can't spin it.
I know. I've got a beautiful.
I should just spin
I
it.
know, but sometimes there's something so lovely about having that little memory. It's the most expensive fiber. Oh, Cheryl. Oh God. Yeah, well, you can't. You can't spend it.
I can't spin it now, right?
It's an investment,
What
right?
will happen to this fiber?
Oh my God. Okay, that's a fiber that you don't want to mess up.
So I have to make sure I know what I'm doing before I touch that, right? So it's
Yeah,
taken years, but
I
I'm working
get
on
that.
it.
I get that. That's going to be your magnum opus, like later on. Like, oh my goodness. Wow, that's beautiful. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Um, and then, do you have a favorite spinning or hand spun project so far? This can be quite difficult, but do you have something that you are like really proud of that you think back and go, oh yeah, that's nice, or something like that?
Well, I this is probably the most recent thing that
Oh,
I
nice.
made and spun. So this is the shift.
Yes.
Andrea Mowry's shift pattern. This is very, very popular, but I can understand why it's so popular. I really do. Because when you knit it, it's completely addictive, and it's especially addictive when you work with handspun yarn and handspun yarn with different colors, and you just see the colors come in and out, and it's just amazing. And so the project that I'm working on right now is basically I'm going to make the shift, which is the bigger version of it,
Oh,
the
yeah.
shawl version. And so I have yarn that is halfway
Mhm.
through in the middle of being spun for, so I have to make 6 of these skeins. So I have about 4. I'm working on 5 right now. And so hopefully by the holidays I'll have a shawl that I can wear that will be the shift. No,
And
the night shift.
because it's a sport weight, isn't it, ish, or whatever. It's a kind of a, yeah.
Um, this one is sport weight, but
Yeah.
the night shift, the big shawl version, is worsted,
Okay,
DK worsted.
okay, okay, nice. And what
Yeah, so
fibers are
I'm
you
making this as
using?
3-ply.
Yeah, lovely. And
Yeah,
is that Sweet Georgia?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. This is the gemstones color, so
Oh,
that made that.
pretty.
And then this is the farm to table color,
Oh,
which made
gorgeous.
that.
So nice. Very
And
yellow,
then
isn't it? Very yellow, bright.
this and this one.
Oh yeah. I think I got that. I think I spun that
Yeah.
the other day.
I love yellow. I love yellow, but
Yeah.
it doesn't love me the same way. I love it though.
Actually, it really I love this. But
Mm,
I never
yeah.
wore like a I never made anything like this before, but actually I love wearing it. So
Kind of like a honey ginger kind of
like a
color. Yeah.
mustardy type thing. Like
Yes.
brings out the
Yes.
hair, the ready hair, which is nice
Hmm.
because I'm losing it. I'm going grey. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So it happens to all of us. Yeah, so that actually concludes our main kind of interview section. So we have a lot of questions there. You actually answered a couple. A couple of people were asking about the stunning cowl. So that is the night shift.
Oh, this one is the shift, the
Sorry, yes,
shift
the
Shift.
towel,
shift.
and
Yeah,
then the shawl is going to be the night shift.
the night shift. Yeah, I'll get that up for you as Mina goes through the rest of the questions.
Okay. So quickly, before we get to the questions, Deborah's actually just chimed in. What was the name of that fiber that you were talking about? The one that was super special?
Pegora.
Angora. So apparently it's
Hmm.
a type of goat, a cross between a pygmy goat and an Angora goat. And they're really little. And she said she
Hmm.
spun some once and it was amazing. So
That makes sense because I spun it as part of a workshop that I took with Robin Brusso at SOAR, and it was one about goat fiber. So we spun like mohair, we spun a whole bunch of different kinds of mohair, spun cashmere and pagora in that same workshop. So that makes
that
sense.
makes sense. Yeah. And also
Yeah.
makes sense why it would be so expensive because if they're that tiny, then they're not going to be producing that much fiber. So
Yeah.
okay. So first up, we have a question. It says, what are your thoughts on e-spinners?
Oh, I use one. I have one. I love it. So the way that I was working with the e-spinner, so I was working with right now I have the Ashford eSpinner 3, and it's been great. I was for a while spinning on that pretty exclusively, but then with this project that I'm working on right now, I really, 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 really wanted to get very well acquainted with the Saxony wheel that I have at home. So when my kids were babies, I managed to get my absolute dream wheel. It was like the wheel that I test drove back in like 2006, and I was always like, that's the one I want to have. And somebody found it for me on a marketplace, and so that was at my house. I wanted to spin on that for a long time, so I've been exclusively spinning on the Saxony wheel in the evenings, but now I ply everything with the e-spinner, and it is fantastic. Yes, I love it.
Yeah, I can imagine if I had an e-spinner, plying is probably what I would use it for the most because it's like that would be really that's the part of the process that as much as I enjoy spinning and I enjoy the plying, I kind of when it gets to the plying I'm like, come on, I want it to be over. So also you get the most consistency in terms of like the twist that you get into your plied yarn as well, I imagine.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be the idea. However, I did notice that when I was plying these yarns, because the plying goes so fast, you're building it up on the bobbin so quickly, then you have to always be pausing to like slide the little thing along
So
the slide your
yeah,
flyer hook. And
that's
then I
my
was
main
thinking, oh,
problem. Yeah, that's my
yeah.
main problem with it because
Uh,
I got the woolly winder for my Ashford Traveller, and literally it's changed my whole life. I'm like, there's no stopping. You can spin start to finish.
Yeah.
None of this moving business. And my e-wheel, which is the exact same as yours, actually, the Ashford e-spinner 3, it has the thing, and I'm just like, this is so frustrating.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
do I invest in a woolly winder for my e-spinner just to ply it? Or
That's the question I have right now too.
will I just sell my e-spinner and just buy more woolly winder bobbins? I don't know what to do.
Or just be okay with pausing the e-spinner to slide the hook. I mean, it just sounds so
I'm like,
what
I
a
just
problem
don't
to
use
have,
it.
right?
I just don't use
This
it.
is like the epitome of first world problems right now.
Exactly.
First
Like,
world
I
spinning
can't
problems.
slide the hook.
I've got so many wheels, but I have 250 euros for this thing to
No,
be,
yeah.
which is slightly annoying to stop.
So I don't think he's hitting the button on the.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so
That's why I don't have one yet.
the follow-up question from Dagmar was, do you have a favorite weight that you spin? And if yes, why? And she says specifically if you're not spinning for a particular project or purpose.
Oh yeah, I think if I sit and I spin my default yarn, it ends up being sort of like about sport weight. That's about how it ends up. Yeah.
Okay.
If I just sit and I spin what's comfortable, what feels good, and then I two ply it, it becomes a sport weight. And eventually, I mean, that kind of yarn, I can easily weave. It would work
Yeah.
really nicely with weaving, using it with
Which is
maybe like
nice
a
as well.
commercial work.
I mean, so sport weight's a pretty good sort of default weight to be on spinning. It's a bit thicker than spring grain, but not quite as heavy as a DK. Like it's a nice middle ground, I think.
You can substitute it into a lot of patterns, I think, couldn't you? Yeah, just changing the needle size. That's what I think anyway, because mine is default. My default is sport. I wonder, actually, that'd be an interesting question. If anyone has figured out their default, just pop it in the chat there. I'm science experiment. Science for science.
I think it changes over time too. I think for a long time also my default was almost lace weight. So I would spin and then two ply that, and that would become like a lace weight yarn, and that was getting too fine. So you have to be a little bit cognizant about not getting too fine, because then it takes forever to spin anything.
Okay, so you actually answered the next question, which was about the cowl. So the following question was, this is kind of moving on from the first question pretty well. Do you ever just spin a palette cleanser, just going with the flow and not worrying about consistency or how perfect it is or anything like that?
I feel like I kind of spin like that all the time. I don't worry too much about making it all perfect. So if there's like a little slub or a little bump, I'm fine with that. I know not everybody's okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it sounds like
I feel like there's a lot of places to be really fussy, and I'm really fussy with a lot of other parts of what I make. Like with weaving, you have to be especially very clear, and everything has to be really organized and good and good tension, all of these things. And so I feel like I put a lot of attention on that. But spinning is fun. Spinning is relaxing to begin with. So if there's like a slub or a bump, I don't.
Don't stress about it.
Yeah,
I think kind of what the question meant was, and like this is how I would have interpreted it, is kind of like if you're spinning for a project or spinning for something in particular, and then before you start another big spinning project, you just spin something for fun where you're not being like, oh, this is going to be for X thing, because that's kind of how I would tackle things. So like I might be spinning for a big project, or I'm spinning something and I'm like, oh, I want this to be whatever weight of yarn for a sweater that I'm making or whatever. Then once that project is done, the next thing I want to do is just throw something on the wheel where I don't have to think about it, and I just spin whatever and it becomes whatever. And if I don't use that yarn, then it's fine as well, kind of thing. I think that's another way of thinking about it. Is that something that you do?
Oh, I do that, absolutely. Because we're constantly dyeing things at the studio, and then anything that looks a little bit pretty, I'll just be like, oh, kind of want to take that home, and then that'll come home with me and then become a thing that goes in between all the other projects. So that happens all the time.
Okay, so another question we have from Catherine is, did you have an art yarn phase, and if so, what do you do with the stuff once it's made?
I had a very brief art yarn phase for sure. I learned how to make the slubby yarn, the thick and thin yarn, learned how to make coils, cocoons. Um, I followed this woman, I think her name was Plucky Fluff. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her work. She did a ton of art yarn spinning. It was really beautiful, beautiful stuff. Um, yeah, the stuff that I did make and spin, I think is still yarn for the most part. I never knit with it. It's just cool
It's just
to
pretty to
see.
look at, and that in
Yeah,
and
it
of
is
itself
pretty to
has
look at and
value.
it's fun.
The next question we have is, do you tend to knit or weave more with your hand span?
A little bit of both, half and half, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Do, 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 do. And then Mary's asking, do you always do intentional spinning? I mean, do you choose your final project before you begin to spin, or decide when you see what the yarn looks like? So yes to the second.
Yeah. I think like I said, there's a lot of things that have to be premeditated. Like weaving has to be premeditated. You kind of need to know what you need to put on the loom before you start putting things on. But spinning is not like that. Like spinning is you can pick up this ball of fluff and just start spinning it. And I think that that's the joy of it. That's the fun of it, so that you don't have to be as premeditated. I think that if you do want to end up with a project at the end of the day, then you do have to work backwards and say, well, I have to spin it this way in order to get this, in order to get this, in order to get this. And if you're like very limited on time and you want to make sure that you end up with that final project at the end of the day, then I feel like, yeah, you would need to work in a more intentional way, be really clear about what your goal is, what your objective is here. But for me, like spinning is how I relax at the end of the day. I'll sit with my husband, we'll watch a show, and then that's when I do my spinning. And so I don't always go into it with a final hand spun project at the end of the day. My goal is to enjoy the feeling of spinning.
Yeah. No, I totally appreciate that. Consider it's funny because I feel the exact same way about spinning, in the sense that because knitting and designing is my job, spinning is the thing I do to relax. As much as I enjoy the knitting part, obviously I enjoy it, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But it is like always in my brain as like knitting is work, so therefore spinning is the relaxation side. So I completely can appreciate that. Okay, another question we have was, where did the name Sweet Georgia come from?
Well, Sweet Georgia was the name that I gave the blog that I started in 2004. And we have in Vancouver sort of a body of water that's around Vancouver called the Strait of Georgia. And so it was a name that I had wanted because I wanted to start a bakery at the very beginning. So when I started the blog in 2004, I was actually going to write about baking and baking bread. And then I only made one post about bread and then everything else was about knitting. And so I just kept the name and just kept going with it. And then it just all rolled into something brand new.
That's great.
I love that.
Yeah, that's
Jenny is asking, you mentioned you were a knitter first and then got into spinning. So when did you start weaving, and was there a particular reason/event that got you onto it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did start knitting when I was a kid in grade school, and then I started spinning in around 2004, 2005. I went to Place des Arts, which is a local school here in Vancouver, and they had access to spinning wheels. I brought my own spinning wheel at the time, and so there was a spinning instructor there that was absolutely just kind of like one of those very pivotal people in your lives that you meet that just changes everything for you. And so I had tried to learn how to spin on my own. I watched like Judith Mackenzie on DVD and tried to learn from her. But then I went to Place des Arts to try to figure out if what I was doing was correct. And so the spinning instructor, Irene, she was really wonderful, sat with me and then watched me spin, and she would just make gentle comments about, oh, try this, oh, try this, oh, try this. And we were spinning in a room that was surrounded by floor looms. Like the room was packed with floor looms and table looms. And so you couldn't get away from it. Like they were right there. And she would just occasionally nudge and say, you need to learn how to weave. And and it was not like pushy or anything. It was just a suggestion. And so I think the next term I signed up for the weaving class, and then that was it. Like I was just all in on weaving. But I feel like that's very much what I would like to be able to do in the school as well, is just to sort of give people that gentle nudge, like, hey, you know, what you're doing with your spinning is great. That looks good. You know, just give people some encouragement. And then from there, it's like, have you looked at this? Have you thought about that? What do you think about trying this? And just see where people go. Because you may or may not like it. You don't have to like it, right? I just happen to really like it, but not everybody's going to like it. But you won't know unless you try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You won't know unless you try.
Exactly.
Okay, one final question we have was, what caused you to turn a hobby, the blog, into a business?
It took over my life. It really did. I had a business at the time. I was doing graphic design and web development. I had a full-on business, and I started the blog on the side as just for fun, something that I was doing on the weekends and then the evenings. And then I started dyeing yarn. That took over my weekends, took over my evenings, until I had to sort of decide what to do, because they started to compete for time with each other so much so that I had to like pause, step back, and then really look at what I wanted to do. And I felt like what I wanted to contribute was more in the fiber world than what I was doing in the design world. And I think that I could still use all of my graphic design and web development skills in a different way that also helped enable people to try the fiber arts.
Yeah, that sounds like
I love that.
Good decision.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, obviously it is though, because it's such a successful, you know, well, from looking at it from the outside, you know, you hire like a lot of people, don't you? You have a staff, you've made all these jobs for people, making beautiful things, and, you know, educating people as you go. I love the Friday visits. They're just so nice to catch up on. Sometimes they're live and sometimes they're just vlogs, and it's just lovely. So yeah, I think if anyone else has any questions that they want to hop on and ask, if you want to unmute yourselves, or if you're happy,
well, quick tally of the results from people commenting about their default spins. There's roughly 7 saying around sport weight, and about 3 or 4 saying fingering weight is their default 2-ply yarns.
We're going to have to do a bigger sample selection for further science. But I'm very interested in this.
Might post on our Instagram about it.
Yeah. That'd be good. Cool. Felicia, it's absolutely lovely to have you. We'll sign off now. So, and for the people watching on YouTube, thank you so much. And just one final time, will you just let us know where we can find you on the internet?
Oh, absolutely. So our website is sweetgeorgiayarns.com. We also have schoolofsweetgeorgia.com, and then we're on Instagram at Sweet Georgia and also at School of Sweet Georgia.
Lovely.
I will make sure all those places are linked below in the description box on YouTube as well. So if you guys need to find it, it'll be there.
Fantastic.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.